Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a new releases wrap up specifically for some things that came out in June. I'm going to jump right into it and start with the Final Strife. This is the first book in an adult fantasy series. I mentioned it in a regular wrap up style video and I described it as the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard meets Red Rising by Pierce Brown with sprinkles of N.K. Jemisin. So within this story, as you can probably guess from those other two that I mentioned, we have a caste system. And within it, we have three classes. We have the Embers, the Dusters, and the Ghostings. The Ghostings are incredibly mistreated. This book is quite violent. I do think that the banter between characters, the characters themselves, and the writing style is definitely fantastic for if you're kind of just making your way into adult fantasy, or maybe you're a little intimidated by some of the epics. This one I think is going to feel almost like new adult, but I do want to emphasize that the violence is very intense in this story, and how the Ghostings are treated is a perfect example of that, as the Ghostings, when they are babies, have their tongues cut out and their hands cut off. They are essentially these slaves within their society, and sadly some of the world building that is involved has to do with how they've learned to communicate and how they've learned to work with the things that have been done to them. So they do have their own means of communication, and I actually really enjoyed seeing how the author incorporated, they do have a character that is a ghosting, and seeing how they communicate and they use their body, their expressions. I thought that was really well done. And then on top of that, you have specific tools that are made for these groups of people that don't have their hands to work with, even though they are expected to work. And so how they are treated is terrible. You see extremely harsh, unfair punishments dealt to people for the smallest of transgressions, for the smallest of crimes, for basically nothing but suspicions. So really, they are extremely mistreated. And they're not the only ones mistreated. The Dusters are mistreated as well. While they are not physically harmed the way the Ghostings are when they are young, they are extremely mistreated. They are seen as less than. And part of the reason is that the Embers have the ability to use magic through their blood. And so they kind of decide that this is what has placed them in a higher position within their society and why they should be the ruling class. And so within that, you have a character who is a Duster, so they are in the middle class, and they are somebody who wants to break the caste system down. And then you see a character who is a part of the Embers, who's very naive and is not really aware of everything that is going on. And they have these sort of high ideals for society, but they don't actually have the knowledge of what it would take to make society better, even though they have these lofty goals of how to make society this great, wonderful place. These two characters definitely clash in personality, but they do ultimately have a similar vision of making the world better. And then you also get this other perspective that is a little bit mysterious. You do see them through the perspective that is a ghosting. And I would recommend that if you want to pick this one up, don't look at the synopsis on Goodreads, because I do think it gives away some of the ways in which the characters are connected and their motivations. And it does it subtly, but it's still enough there that I would say maybe just don't look at that synopsis. But either way, like I said, I do think it's good as an introductory book into adult fantasy. Shh, no. I think it's a great introductory book into adult fantasy. But I do want to point out that for me, I think that sometimes I felt a little bit of a clash between the heaviness of what was happening in society versus how the characters would behave. Sometimes I thought that their actions or their particular moods in certain moments almost didn't seem fitting of some of what was happening around them. And then my biggest thing is that I wish we'd gotten a little bit more of the magic, because it is such a determining factor in the caste system. I do wish we had seen a little bit more about it. What little we did see was really interesting, and what we got from the world building was really interesting. I'm hoping that in the later books in the series that we expand on those things. After that, we have a couple of sequels, because they are sequels. I won't be able to go as in-depth with them, but I just wanted to give some overview thoughts really quick. We have The Inadequate Heir. I have it without its sleeve right now, so I'll go ahead and put up on the screen what the cover looks like. This is without its sleeve, just the regular hardback, so very beautiful actually. But we have this one, Inadequate Heir, and then also For the Throne. I'll start with For the Throne. This is the sequel to For the Wolf. So that story was a Little Red Riding Hood mashup with, I would say, Beauty and the Beast. It was kind of a retelling of those things, but it also had this very frightening, scary, creepy forest setting. And the setup was that we follow these two sisters, one who, from the time she was born, has been meant to be sacrificed to the wolf, which is this mysterious man that lives in this mysterious forest. And by sacrificing her to him, it's supposed to help keep everyone else safe. But our main character, she doesn't really want this life for herself, but she sees no way around it. And so that's the setup for the first book. Her sister is meant to rule. She is for the throne. And so I liked that we were getting a sequel where we get to expand a little bit on what happens at the end of the first book, because a lot occurs at the end of the first book. I do think if you want to pick up the series, it's a mix of, I would say, both romance and fantasy. It's about 50-50 in the first book. The second book is, I think, way more fantasy-based, and it's not that I was disappointed in that, because I'm always down for a good fantasy book. I think you just kind of have to go with the flow. It felt sort of like a dark Greek god sort of story, interestingly, which I wasn't expecting after what I said was the first one, which is basically a Little Red Riding Hood, Beauty and the Beast retelling. So this one I was like, oh, like it almost feels like we're going to the underworld and we're exploring these dying gods, and that's sort of the feeling we get. And we have to try to take their magic, but also maybe their magic shouldn't be taken because it's bad, or maybe we should leave it. So you get all these interesting threads that I was just kind of along for the ride with them, but I don't know that I always felt like I was as emotionally impacted by what was happening as I would have liked to have been. Inadequate Air is a very interesting setup for a sequel, and one that I would say for the most part, if I hear this, I'm like, no thanks, that doesn't sound interesting to me. What I mean by that is this third book in the Bridge Kingdom series, it's almost like it's the first book in its own series, because the first two follow the main characters, Lara and Aaron, and this one follows two different characters that are introduced in the Traitor Queen, which is the second book in the series. But what's interesting is this book parallels the timeline of sort of the first, but basically this entire second book in the series. It runs along the same timeline, but you follow these other characters. And in the Traitor Queen, so this would be the Traitor Queen over here. In the Traitor Queen, you're following Lara and Aaron. And then there are some other characters that impact things that happen to them. And you're like, something's going on with those characters. I don't know what, but it's affecting us. And then you see what was actually going on in The Inadequate Air. You see what was going on with those two characters. And it is definitely its own story. And it's definitely interesting. And it's cool to get to see. And I would say usually if you tell me something runs along parallel, I'm like, I don't need to see the story again. But it really was its own story enough. So then when the other characters, when those scenes would show up where you're like, I remember those from the second book, it was actually kind of fun because it wasn't like it was exactly the same and you are following different characters. So not your usual setup for a third book in a series, but it did work. I would say that the first two are a mix of politics and romance, whereas this one felt definitely more romantically driven and enemies to lovers to the extreme, but there was still enough going on in the plot outside of the romance to push things along. So I liked it. I just think I liked the blend of things in the first two books a little bit more, and the characters. I think I like the characters in the first two more, but it does leave off in a place where I'm like, well, what's going to happen next? So, and now I especially want to know what's going to happen next because of the fact that this one ran parallel to the second one. So now it's been two books of things going on and we're leaving off, and I really truly don't know what we're going to get after. And that's kind of an exciting place to be. After that, we have what is probably one of the most adorable books I have ever picked up. Shout out to Jessie May. She mentioned it in one of my patron reading sprints that we were doing, and she was like, it's just very cute. It's so cute. And I picked it up and it is so cute. If you need a charming, whimsical, lovely fantasy story. I've definitely been on a kick of cozy, happy fantasy, because sometimes you need that. Next to not only all the other really intense, sad, depressing fantasy books, but also because life can be rough, and sometimes you need the cozy. This is the book, Half a Soul. It is so cute, and it is so charming. Charming is just the best word to describe this story. So we follow this girl named Theodora, or Dora for short, and when she was a child, a fairy tried to take her soul, but only succeeded in taking half of it. And since then, she has had her emotions somewhat dulled and muted, and she is living in it's England, and it's very much a Regency type of story where everybody's very proper, and every little thing that every person does, it means so much, and somebody's mannerisms, or if somebody delivers flowers, there's just all these things that, oh, that means this and that means this. And so it's one of those books where even somebody raising an eyebrow or somebody offering to dance, it means so much. So in that kind of a setting, it's a big deal that she doesn't quite have the ability to show all of her full emotion. And so she has been considered this oddity in society, and her cousin, who absolutely adores and loves her, does not want to get married until she knows that Dora is going to be okay. And she doesn't really know what to do. She thinks, okay, well, maybe if we can find somebody to cure Dora, then maybe everything will be worked out. And so they go off to London, and Dora is kind of getting caught up in high society, and she is just such a delightful character. She understands the emotions that she's supposed to have. She understands the reactions she's supposed to have. So she tries to emulate that. And that's something I know there's a lot of people out there that can definitely relate to, that feeling of having to learn how you're supposed to act in order to make everybody else comfortable. And so I thought that was kind of an empowering main character, because there's definitely a lot of people that have that feeling. And so I really enjoyed seeing that in her, but also she's very witty, and she's very clever, and she's very compassionate. It's just she can't quite show those things to the extreme. And she ends up meeting this man who's the Lord Sorcerer, and he is supposedly this individual who does 3 magical things before breakfast, but he is very grumpy. And you see these two kind of come together, and their interactions are fantastic. The other side characters are fantastic, and the magical components, very fairy tale-like. It's wonderful. It's delightful. I can't recommend it enough. Just such a good, happy, cozy, charming read. I've mentioned this next one, This Vicious Grace, in a recent wrap-up, and I have described this as a warm hug in a book. This edition I have, I think, seconds that. This color, when I first got this book in a book box, I was like, wow, that's an intense yellow. But it kind of works. So the setup for the story, it sounds depressing. We have this girl who, she is the Fenestra. She is this being who has the magical ability to enhance other people's magic, and their magic is somewhat elemental based. Her magic is important for their society because there's a certain amount of time that will pass before these demonic beings will attack their society. And so it's very important that our main character has the ability to control her magic, this amplification that she can do, because it is going to be through her and whoever she marries and their powers that they can fight off the demons, basically, that come to attack them. However, thus far, the marriages that she has had have all resulted in her not necessarily being able to amplify their power, because she ends up killing them with her touch. And so she doesn't really know what she's going to do. There's a lot of threats on her life now, because people are thinking, well, maybe she's not the right Fenestra. Maybe we have the wrong girl. And so there's some people that think, well, we'll kill her and then we'll try to find the new Fenestra in time. But then there's also this question of, well, what if she is the right person and we kill her and then there is no one to fight off? What are we going to do? And so she questions herself. Maybe I should let some assassin kill me, because maybe there is somebody else who's out there who is supposed to carry out this task. But she also, on top of that, is like, well, I don't want to die. And if it's me, I really want to try. But she also is scared to try because she's killed 3 people on accident. And so she doesn't really know what to do. So far, you're like, where is this a warm, fuzzy, happy book? And I know that setup sounds depressing. But it's warm and happy and fuzzy because she doesn't know who she can trust, because there's these threats on her life. And so she hires a bodyguard to protect her. And if you like the bodyguard trope, this is the book for you. And their banter and their interactions and some of their interactions with side characters is so fun. And that's really what the book is this her ability to recognize how important it is to have friendship, to have people care about you in your life, why it's important for people to have others in their lives that care for them and that you care for. And like I said, their banter is so adorable and fun and silly and cute. That's it for some recent new releases. There are definitely some others that I'm interested in picking up that I haven't had the chance to. I may have already picked up some July new releases. before some of my June new releases, but either way, I will talk about more new releases the next time I do a dedicated new releases wrap up. If you're interested in any of these ones though, I will have purchase links in the description bar down below, and if you've read them, I would love to know your thoughts. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.